Okay, hi everyone. Thanks to all of you for being here on the last day of the conference. So we're going to kick things off with an invited talk from Sello and Mokwena, and many of you who saw the panel yesterday will of course be familiar with Sello already. But for those of you who didn't, Sello is an associate professor of computer science at the University of Limpopo in South Africa, and formerly the head of the department at Tshwane University of Technology. He works broadly on information systems, technology adoption, and machine learning, particularly in the South African context. He serves widely as a mentor, supervising more than 20 masters and 3 doctoral students, serving as a mentee in article writing at the African AI Deep Learning Indaba, and offering courses on writing broadly to other universities. So we're very fortunate to have him here. And today he'll talk to us about factors influencing low adoption rates of technologies in developing countries.
Thank you, Brian, for the introduction. Good morning. I thought I will start by just locating myself, geographically. Something that I've struggled with is the American geography, and whilst I was here, I've tried to learn as much as I can to understand the American geography. And South Africa is in Africa, as you can see, and then we are right there at the bottom. In Africa, there are basically 2 countries which have Africa in their name: it's Central Africa and South Africa. So we are located there at the bottom, and then this is South Africa. We have 9 provinces, and the province where I come from is the one there at the top, which is called Limpopo, and our university is basically named after our province. And Limpopo is actually a river which separates South Africa from Zimbabwe. And we've got something very unique in South Africa. If you look, there are 2 countries. There's a country here, and another one is that one there. Those are countries on their own, Lesotho and Swaziland. They are right within South Africa. It's something very unique that I've not seen anywhere in the world. And then in 1994, we had a big political change, movement away from white minority rule to the black majority rule. And de Klerk was our last white president for that era. And actually, the way our politics is going, there's a possibility that we may end up with a white president at some stage somewhere. So, and Nelson Mandela was our very first president. And then in 1994, there was this big public participation. In terms of voting, you all know that in maturing democracies, the percentage of people who vote is very, very low. But in 1994, you can see those are long queues of people actually going to vote. We were both white and black excited about the change that was actually coming. But now in 2022, this is a township where majority black people actually live on your right-hand side. And on the left is where the middle-class people live. I live in one of those. But the majority of people actually live here. These are the present conditions that we have. And something which is very funny and interesting, if you look at these places, you can see satellite dishes there. Okay. So although people live in these conditions, but there's a certain degree of use of the technology, especially in entertainment. And actually, which is very worrying to us, that people are more interested in entertainment than in other things. So we're trying to see how do you move this, from people just using this for entertainment and for something more useful. All right. So I'm looking at the whole question of adoption and use of technology. And obviously, we know that technology is the most attractive solution to a lot of problems that we have in developing countries. Starting in schools, going to hospitals, in business and so forth and so on. But something that we see and we realize that there's a general low adoption of technologies in all these spheres. I mean, whether be it in education, in health, or in business. And then we thought that it will be interesting to look at what are these hindrances which cause people for not actually adopting technology. So the kind of problem domains that I've looked at over the years, we've looked, for example, at the school system. Our schools have a public system that is used, which is called South African School Administration and Management System. We have actually done research in that, understanding, for example, why, if this particular system is available, why are the schools not using it? Because you find that the technology is there, but it's not being used. And that's why we're trying to do the research. And then also another area in which we have worked is in higher education. We've looked at things like infrastructure as a service. Why, for example, some universities are not using infrastructure as a service. We're also looking at the use of big data analytics. I mean, because the technology is there, why is not being used? We also look at small and medium enterprises, where we've looked, for example, at software as a service, or even looking at issues of security. And we've also done some work in the banking industry, looking, for example, at the use of internet banking, and also looking at bring your own device, or what is called BOID. And also we've done also some work in agriculture, where we're looking at the use of IoT, and also in health, we've also looked at the health information systems. So those are some of the areas in which we have actually worked and tried to understand what are the issues there. And the approach that we use in terms of methodology or research design is that we are open-minded in the sense of we have to look at what is the problem, and that problem must actually guide us into the kind of methods and methodologies that we are going to use. And something which is very, very important to me when we are dealing with whatever issues that we're looking at is the question of making sure that we clearly define the problem that we are dealing with, so that there is no confusion in terms of what we want to do. And actually, often we'll do an exploratory study. I mean, to go and see if what we're thinking is a problem is actually a problem, because sometimes you can be presumptuous and you think there's a problem, whereas actually there's actually no problem. So we do that so that we are able to design our study in a much more effective way. And then from there, we look at the research approach. Like I said yesterday, that we do not go ahead and tell ourselves that we're going to use this particular method or the other method, because the problem is the one which must tell us which method would be the best to actually use in that particular situation. And then from there also, then we also know in terms of data collection, which methods do we need to use for data collection, and also in terms of data analysis. I mean, we have used, for example, regression analysis. We have used structured equation modeling. We are using machine learning. So, and because sometimes the problem that we have is if we are married to a particular method, it's like they say, if the only tool that we have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. So what we want to do is the methods that we use to collect the data, to analyze the data, must be relevant to the problem that we're actually trying to solve. And at the same time, we don't want to complicate a problem which is very simple. Somebody was telling me of people who were doing research when the space age started. And they had a problem of, in space, you can't use a pen because of, there's no gravity there. The ink must move down. And a lot of money was actually put into that research as to what kind of tool can be used to write when people are in space. And a number of research groups actually worked on this. And somebody said, but why do we do so much research? Let's just use a pencil, because if you use a pencil, you don't have a problem of gravity. So we are trying to make sure that whatever system approach that we use must be relevant to what we're actually doing. And ultimately, I mean, the whole question of reporting and publishing the results. But also something that we are looking at is, at the end of the day, how can our research actually help in terms of whatever problem domain, whether it's the bank, whether it's a school, and so forth and so on, so that we can actually affect policy and maybe look at how that particular institution can help to make sure that the technology is actually being used. Something very interesting, when I joined the University of Limpopo, they had a teaching management system, teaching and learning management system. And majority of people were not using it until COVID. So when COVID happened, I mean, all of us were forced to go away and to teach online. And I mean, some people, all they could remember was that they had a username, you know, they couldn't even remember the password. Okay. And then I'll talk about this at the end. That one of the problems that you have, which actually leads to low adoption of technology, is when you have a manual system which is working, and then you want to introduce an electronic system. But in introducing that electronic system, you leave the manual system, so the electronic system works together with the manual system. So naturally, people actually don't want to become novices. They will continue using that old manual system or the old system that they've actually been using. So in the adoption of technology, we have to make sure that we manage the change very carefully and make sure that we get rid of the old system and then we introduce the new system and make sure that the only one which can be used is the new system and that you don't have parallel systems which are running at the same time. So that is something which is important. All right, and then we have always made sure that in our research, we will actually use a particular theory because the theory, for example, will help us in designing the study, so that we don't grope in the dark and just, you know, we don't know exactly what we are doing. And also, we find that theory is useful to take a broad view of the results, well, ultimately when we are actually going to analyze our results. And then we also find that, I mean, it will also help us to develop a relevant model for the research. And it also helps, very, very important, about formulating of hypothesis if we're using a quantitative approach. And if we use a qualitative approach, it's going to help us with developing what we refer to as a priori themes. And the reason why we want to use theory is that we don't want to work in an epistemological vacuum. We need to be guided by the established theories or knowledge in that particular area. And then at the end of the day, it also helps us in understanding and explaining the factors which influence the problem domain under investigation. So whatever domain we work in, whether we're going to the hospitals or to the schools or whatever the case may be, we make sure that there must be a good theory that we are actually going to use to make sure that we can ground our study in that. And I'm just giving one example of the theories that we use. For example, this is one theory which is called theory of the technology acceptance model. Is one theory which is very good in terms of, I mean, helping us to understand the reason why people adopt technologies or not. If you look, for example, on the left-hand side, we have what is referred to as external variables. So in any environment, I mean, there are certain variables which you will find there. For example, in our case, we find, for example, things like social factors, like facilitating conditions, economic factors, etc., etc. So all those factors becomes very, very important in terms of the problem that we are trying to deal with. And then we look at what we will refer to as constructs, for example, perceived usefulness, perceived ease of use, and we look at the interactions of all these constructs to external variables, and ultimately it will lead us to actual use or not use of the system. So this is one theory that we have used. And then sometimes what we do, we will combine theories. For example, we're doing a study on the adoption of IaaS, infrastructure as a service. And because if you look at cloud computing, we find that, I mean, there's a lot of economic stuff in it. So we then use two theories in that particular case to try and understand the problem that we're dealing with. So we used this transaction cost theory is a theory that you find in economics. And then we also used Diffusion of Information Theory, which is actually a theory which is being used in psychology also. So what we'll do from time to time, I mean, we'll take theories from other fields, as long as that theory can actually help us understand our problem better in terms of use and adoption. And we have published a number of papers in the different domains. Like I've already said, you can see, for example, there's a problem that we're looking at. There was a program which used instant messaging, which somebody developed, where students could actually learn mathematics. We have a very big problem, I mean, in South Africa in terms of the number of maths and science teachers. And I don't know whether it would be a good thing to say. Fortunately, the problems that Zimbabwe experienced has actually caused a lot of Zimbabwean teachers to come to South Africa now to actually help us with that particular problem. But it's a very big problem, and somebody came up with this system where students can actually learn mathematics. And we're trying to look to see if the schools are adopting it and the children are adopting it and so forth and so on. And excuse me, and I'll talk about what we actually found about this. And we also looked at the use of visual infrastructure, and this particularly one was actually looking for this one in the banks. And then we also looked at the small and medium enterprises in terms of the use of software as a service. And we also looked at factors influencing banking. So we're looking at those things. I mean, this is some, I'm just giving just some of the few examples of the areas that we have actually looked at, and we have actually published work in this particular areas. And then our findings, which actually in the different studies, I'm actually just giving a summary of what we found in the different studies. We found that, for example, lack of awareness of a technology is the biggest impediment for people using a technology. And actually, if you think about that, that will also affect not only in developing countries, it will affect people in general, because, I mean, if you're not aware that there's a technology to solve a particular problem that you're actually having, you will not be able to use that particular technology. And I mean, even us, who are writing the software and developing models, is something that we need to look at. Once you have developed a software or a model and so on, how are you going to make sure that actually people know about that particular model? And actually, if you look at, I mean, what we do in academia, there's a lot of work that we do, which is a lot of good work. And then what we do, I mean, it's only within that particular university. Sometimes it's between that a student and that particular supervisor, and the work is published in a paper, and that's the end of it. And I mean, something which can actually help people, which can be useful, is not going to be used because people are not aware of that particular system that we have actually written or developed and so forth and so on. So that's something that we need to think about. I mean, once we develop a technology, how do we actually take it to market and make sure that people actually know about that particular technology? Another thing that we found, the reason why people are not adopting or using systems which are available is the problem of complexity. So sometimes the way we write, for example, our interface and how people are going to interact with the technology that we have actually developed is very, very, very complex. It's very, very difficult. And actually, what we found is, I mean, people will try a technology for some time, and then if it's too difficult for them to use it, they actually will not adopt that particular technology. They're not going to use it. So it's very important that we look at how we can simplify whatever technology that we develop for people to be able to actually use it. And another thing also which we found is when people find that a technology does not make a difference for them in their work, in their daily work, they end up not actually adopting the technology because it does actually not help them. It's not actually useful to them to help them to make their work easier or to make it faster or to make it better. And when it comes to banking, we have found that there's a problem, for example, where people are afraid that they will actually lose their money when they actually use that particular banking product. And I mean, we're all aware, I mean, how many people have been swindled of their money because of one technology or the other that they were using of the bank. So security is it's a very big impediment. And it's important that, I mean, for example, what we're looking at now in the way we develop systems is you know, if you think about it, most of the time, security is an afterthought in the development of systems that we are developing. And what we need to be doing is thinking about security from the time that we start with the development of a system and all the way up to the end of that system. So to make sure that, because what will happen most of the time is if once people have a problem with security in a particular area, it actually causes them to be reluctant to use technologies which are related in that particular field, which is very, very important. And something that we also found is what will happen is some organizations will purchase a technology, but then there are no policies within that institution in terms of the use of that particular software. For example, I don't know how prevalent this is already in a lot of your institutions. In South Africa, we have what is called bring your own technology. So the institution does not buy the machine for you. You go and buy it yourself. And then you can actually bring it to the institution. But I mean, if you think about it, most of us do that. I mean, if you use your cell phone to access the resources of the university. So what you're doing basically is you're bringing your own device into the institution. And what we found, for example, with bring your own device, you find that already the users are bringing their own device, but the institution does not have policies in relation to this particular new phenomenon which we're actually seeing. So what happens is the institution does not adopt it formally, although people are actually using it informally. So it's very important in terms of policy development that we make sure that there are policies within the institution in terms of how this technology is actually going to be used. And then this one, I talked about this one already, that the problem that we found is that you find that there's a manual system or an old system in the organization, and we are trying to introduce a new system. And what we do, unfortunately, is we allow the old system to run parallel with the new system. And most of the time, what people will do, remember, the problem that you have is if you are moving from a new technology to a new technology, you are an expert in the old technology. Now, the new technology actually is going to make you a novice. And we find that people don't want to be novices, they want to be experts as they've always been. So it's very important to have a good change management when we are moving from the old system to the new system, or we're moving from a manual system to an electronic system. And something that also we found is, especially when we work with small and medium enterprises or businesses, we find that the cost of the technology is an impediment for them to actually adopt the technology. So that's why we need to look at how can we make the technology cost effective. And I mean, if you think now about cloud computing, in many, many ways, it's actually reducing the cost of technology, because you only use what you need instead of the old system where, I mean, you have to buy the whole package, although you're going to use a very small part of that particular package. Okay. So these are our findings. Thank you very much.
So we have time for questions. Just use the microphones.
Sorry, I'm just handing out the mic.
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for the talk. There were very interesting points that you raised. I was just wondering if you have any suggestions for solutions. What could change in the future? So you mentioned many problems, but do you have any suggestions?
Yes. Yeah. So what we're doing, if I can go back. So for example, I mean, if we work with a particular, let's say it's a school or university or it's a bank, we will raise this kind of things with them to say the problem that people have is this. So what can you do to make sure that you deal with that? I mean, that's why, for example, I'm saying the question of lack of policies. So what you will do is, I mean, you will advise the institution to say, look at your policies, make sure that there's clarity of policy so that everybody knows exactly what they actually need to do. So.
Thank you so much for the interesting talk. Oh, wow, that's really loud. I guess I have two questions. The first being, how much do you find also, you mentioned an important part of the formulation for understanding adoption of technology is formulating the problem, I guess the bottlenecks for adoption. Do you find that within the communities that you're looking at for understanding adoption, that it's the case that these problems themselves are not, that there's a lack of awareness of the problem itself, not so much of the technology? Thinking, for example, of, you talked about mathematics education. I guess this is a more trivial one, but thinking that if there's like a lack of teachers and you're being able to provide a distance education in mathematics, here the problem that it's tackling, I guess, is simply having an education in the first place. Though that's an easier problem. I guess there are other technologies that purport to solve more complex problems. And so my first question is it the case that communities themselves sometimes lack the awareness of the problem that the technology is trying to solve rather than the technology itself? And if that's something that is a lever for adoption. And I forgot my second question.
No, it's fine. Yeah, what we're looking at is, you're right, that we are looking at the fact that there is a problem. That's our first call upon. And then the next thing we're saying now, because there is this particular problem, we're looking at, is there a technology which can solve the problem? And so now what we're trying to see is now, if we know the problem and there is a technology which can solve that problem, why is it not that people are not adopting that technology? Because that technology will actually help them to solve the problem. So that's basically what we're looking at. Because what you're saying is, you have a problem, there's a solution to the problem which has been developed. So now, why are you not using that solution to your problem? So we're looking at it, and then I mean, we're looking at these things. Why are people not using the solution? And so that, remember, I mean, if we can find out the reason why people are not using the solution, we can solve all those problems which impede them from using the solution, so that they can start using the solution.
And I guess I just remembered my other question. I'll pass it on. I promise that sometimes what I've seen in limited experience in certain communities is more generally a lack of trust too, that comes from, I guess, a multitude of these factors. Is trust, for example, something that you run into, like the fact that there might be erroneous beliefs about a technology? And I mean, I think of these, for example, security is the one that comes to mind as where mistrust can seep in. But I guess probably in all of these other levers, trust can come in. And is that something that you see in the communities that you work with?
Yes, I mean, it's not in all cases, but in some of the cases. For example, we found when we were doing research in universities in the use of infrastructure as a service, the problem is, remember now, you are going to outsource your technology to other people and your data and what have you. And the problem is now the problem of trust. I mean, if somebody else is going to look after this, are we not going to have problems with that? So there is the question of trust. But I mean, if you think about it, the question of trust, I mean, majority of us here, we're on one form of social media or the other. And then, I mean, once you put your stuff there, it makes you actually trust that your data will actually be safe. And we know most of the time it's not safe because those companies actually need it for their own purposes, for marketing and what have you. But what I'm saying is, trust is an issue. But I mean, if you think about it carefully, there's a lot that already that we are putting out there without thinking about the question of trust. But it is an issue which was actually raised, whether the outsourcing of these services, that we can trust the people who are actually going to use them.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed this talk. I was wondering if you would be willing to talk more about cloud services. I think that's a really interesting component, and I come from a perspective where I've been at my organization for 4 years, and when I first started, we didn't use cloud computing at all, and then we have done away with most of our servers over the last 4 years and adopted a cloud forward approach. And I think you mentioned yesterday you all partner with a couple of different cloud companies, and we do as well, and we have encountered a lot of bumps in the road as we've made that transition from the logistics of which service to work with, to security issues, and just some larger concerns. And I think that there's a lot of promise in cloud computing, but I was wondering if you noticed any particular challenges with the adoption of cloud forward approaches that may be different in the technology settings that you're working in.
Yeah, presently in South Africa, there's a government regulation that you cannot outsource your services to a company which is outside South Africa. So what has happened, for example, AWS, they are starting to build their data centers in South Africa because the law says you cannot outsource it to a company which is outside. And that's why, for example, we've got in South Africa, we've got a company which is called CETA, which actually looks after the technology of the government. So they have to work together with those companies to make sure that whatever you are going to outsource will not be outside the country. Although for me, I mean, really, to me that is hair splitting. I mean, if you think about cloud computing, the essence of cloud computing, we are actually accessing whatever is on the internet. I mean, for me, whether it's in this geographical area or the other geographical, what difference does it make at the end of the day? Because I mean, if you think about security, people who want to access your data, doesn't matter whether it's in America or it's in Europe or it's in Africa at the end of the day. But I mean, we all also know that the problem that we have with technology, that is always one step ahead of legislation. So some certain things, in terms of legislation, they make sense, but I mean, in terms of technology, that doesn't make sense. But we have those policies in South Africa that you cannot outsource it to outside the geographical area of the country.
Yes, thank you so much for that. This may touch on that a little bit. As I was listening to your list of findings, I was really curious about if you could tell a little bit more about which of these are things that need to be addressed on the side of the consumer, where the consumer needs to be informed, needs to be educated, needs to be like somehow be ready for the technology in a way. And what is it where the provider of the technology needs to make the change on their end, where they actually need to change the technology to better suit the South African user?
Yes. What we found it's a two-way street. So the provider of the technology has to make sure, for example, that there is general awareness of the presence of the technology. And for example, what has happened in the banks in South Africa, it's what they've tried to do is to move the infrastructure even to the rural areas. Because initially the biggest problem was that you didn't have the infrastructure in the rural areas. The infrastructure was more in the urban areas. So in order for people to use certain technologies, they have to go to the urban areas. So what they've done now is, make sure that you move the technology to the urban areas so that it's easier for people to actually, when you have these awareness campaigns, then people will have access, because sometimes, you can have awareness, but if you don't have access, it's actually not going to help you. Okay. And then also, like I'm saying, in terms of technologies which are used in institutions, that there is clear policy, and then also that you don't have this dual system where people can continue with what they've been doing, whereas we have actually purchased very expensive technology that people can actually use to improve their work and improve the organization. So we look at those two things at the consumer level and also in terms of the organization.
Thanks. I'm fully with you that
all this access to digital and data-enabled technologies creates tremendous opportunities for these communities. But I'm also a little curious about the potential harmful effects, because when you bring technology to a community, it's an uncontrollable beast. For instance, you bring smartphone technology, there could be loads of interventions that you can provide, but there's also potentially harmful effects, such as online gambling. So I'm curious what you think about bringing technology to these communities, and how careful we should be about the potential adverse effects.
You remember what I was saying about this? That you go to this, you can see there's serious poverty there, but you can see about, and what you find is people will choose the technologies which serve them. And in this particular case, this is entertainment, and we actually, I was talking to one young person who's a motivational speaker, and he was saying, there's so much useful information, but normally people will choose what is more entertaining than what is more useful to them. So you're right. It's a pity that sometimes that's human nature. We will lean to what is much easier than what is actually a little bit more difficult, and most of the time what is easier is not very helpful. So yeah, those are the like you're saying, we are complaining, for example, now about that our youth are not reading, but they read a lot of things that are not useful to them when you actually look at what is happening with social media. And I don't think from a technological standpoint, or that there's not that is that much that we can actually do. There was a very interesting finding. When we started with the internet, there were a lot of journalists, and they were given access to this internet to use and so on. And later on, somebody did research and find that 90% of them were looking at pornography instead of really doing research on whatever they were doing. So I don't know. That's human nature.
So I'm curious, specifically in the context of cloud providers and some of these infrastructure as a service systems. A lot of the issues you list really resonate for me as things that cause switching costs kind of globally, with be it from adopting in the first place, or even if you're already using some of these technologies, either moving to newer versions or increasing the intensity of use of them. And I guess the kind of classic economic solution from the cloud provider perspective is they should be providing subsidies for people to kind of overcome the switching costs and then getting a longer term customer. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective on kind of why, where the barriers are to that happening here. Is it that there are factors that prevent them from kind of capturing customers and being willing to give those subsidies? Is it they're not sure how to provide subsidies? There's just where are there levers that can maybe move things on that front?
Yeah, remember, we have to look at the public sector, and then you also look at the small and medium enterprises, and then you look at big business. So obviously for big business it's easy because the money is there. Small, medium enterprises, the cost is a very big issue. And then when it comes to public service, like I already said, there are policies there in terms of, whether you can have this in this geographical area and so on. What we find, the small, medium enterprises, the use of cloud has made it easy. For example, when you look at software as a service, remember, for example, in the past, what would happen if you're purchasing Microsoft Office? You'll have to buy everything. But now, I mean, you can choose, no, I don't need Microsoft Word, I only need Excel, for example. So you just pay for Excel, and you also only you pay as you go. So that has actually cut the cost in many, many ways. And what we're looking at, for example, when we're looking at software as a service, we're saying to small and medium enterprises that, I mean, are you aware, I mean, that you have this new arrangement that you don't have to pay for everything like it actually happened before. So, I mean, people would just think in terms of the old classical way of doing things and say, no, this is costly for me, I can't do it. But what we're saying is, now if you look at the models that as we have them now, actually they've actually reduced cost. So that's what we found.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind. Speaking towards software as a service, in this application area specifically, or like in this geographic area, do you feel that like on the consumer side or the business side, one side is sort of benefiting more from this like new structure? Or is it do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, our understanding is that the consumer is benefiting more in the sense that, I mean, if you take the old model, that you have to buy everything, most of which you're not going to use. And then you've got change of version. Now you must move from this version that you have to a new version. And now you are buying the new version with everything that you don't need or majority of things that you don't need. Whereas, I mean, if you use software as a service, you are only going to use what you need. And if there's change in version, it doesn't affect you because you've already paid for it. So that's what we find.
Thanks.